If you love anime, you love tanks, you love manga, and you particularly are fond of the number one Japanese animation artist of all time, Hayao Miyazaki, then you might be aware of this, but it's likely you're not aware of it. It is his adaptation, anamorphic, however you say it, um, of Otto Karius's Tigers in the Mud, which is a World War II book, memoir of a tiger ace. And basically, he chose a certain part of the book and illustrated it. This was a series he did in Model Graphics magazine. And it would just, every once in a while, a new portion of the story would appear. And the story was collected in this book here. So these are all the clippings from Model Graphics, combining it into the complete works. I wouldn't say complete story, but it's really great. And of course, there's no English translation available. You can find certain things. Someone on Tumblr translated a great deal of it. I had to use my little translator to clear up a couple things, but it goes on to tell the story. And again, you're going to see that all too familiar Miyazaki touch to everything. And he starts off just kind of telling a general story of the book. Doesn't necessarily talk about anything that happens precisely. In fact, there's little notes everywhere that this is a fantasy, this is a fantasy, this is a fantasy, this didn't happen. And of course, he's constantly making fun of himself, how quickly he works on things. But it does eventually get to the actual battles, particularly in Estonia in March of 1944, when Otto Karius's command platoon, which is only 2 Tiger ones, manages to pretty much take out a Russian push. Again, the arc is just fantastic, and he has notes everywhere that this is not a model reference. Like, he doesn't want the tank nerds to bother him, but it does then go on to show some pictures of a real Tiger one. That's, I believe, I'm not sure which one that is. Must be the. Usually I know which Tiger one is which. But, yeah, it's funny. He actually, well, he has pictures of this late tiger. It's not the Bovington tiger, I'll tell you that. So, yes, the comic just continues, and it's really, really, just for the artwork, it is so much fun. I could just imagine being, 12, 13 years old and tearing through this book. So it goes on to tell that story of that engagement he made, which I believe got him the Knight's Cross. And Miyazaki goes on. I mean, it's quite in depth. This is like 4 or 5 parts at least. But he goes to Estonia in the book. And in fact, he even draws himself going to Estonia and visiting the graves of Russian soldiers and seeing the places where the actual engagements took place. And there's some photos of that. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he goes to Germany and goes to Otto Karius's pharmacy, which he's still alive in 1998, and he gets a Tamiya Tiger tank model signed by him. I'm sure had a bunch of other things signed, but it was pretty intense. Imagine this Japanese guy writing you and saying, "I want to come visit you. By the way, I've drawn you as a pig in a successful comic series for a bunch of years." Anyway, it's a very cute story. Something that really wouldn't fly, I think, in the Disney World version of Miyazaki. So, and then at the end of the book is a bonus, and it's from the Daydream notes, but it's not about Autocarius. Instead, it's a fantasy story about this, the very end of the war, last day of the war. This pig, and it's actually a continuation from another book because I know it. A pig that was experimenting with the Porsche type VK4501 tank. He loses that, or gets moved to a mouse, and he's in the mouse tank. When they self-destruct it, which is true, to keep the Russians from getting it. And it shows him wandering through the woods, and he comes across an abandoned Panzer IV, and he wants to take it, but it turns out some people have already claimed it, and they agree to crew the tank together. So they load up all of their refugee stuff, that is luggage and clothes, and drive off, which is very true in World War II. Everyone was heading west to avoid Russian occupation. So they're cruising around the Panzer IV, get attacked by Russians. Of course, Russians are using Panzerfaust, which is totally true, and shows how the shaped charge is defeated by the Scherzen on the Panzer IV, which is, of course, true. And, of course, women's clothing goes flying through the air after the explosion. And, it's just this very silly story. Once again, the Germans are pigs, and the civilians are people. Anyway, I think it's an adorable story. I think that there's a scene where the girl takes out a Russian tank, even though the war's over, by the way. Brilliant, beautiful, fun, brilliant artwork. I highly recommend getting this book if you can. Well, it's a joy to go through. Just talking about the improvements that could have been made on the Panzer IV turret. So that leads me to the other book, which is the Daydream notes in general. What's so interesting is this is Japanese style, where you read it backwards, but the Daydream notes book is Western, where you read it the other way. And again, it's got all these brilliant little stories with excellent artwork. And these were in the back of Model Graphics magazine. Now, these are a lot earlier. These stories are from 90, 97, 98, 99, while these are from the 80s and 90s, early 90s. But again, they're just as good. I love this, where he talks about the battle between the Monitor and the Merrimack in the Civil War. And it's just, again, great artwork. And shows how the battle was mostly inconclusive. Again, these stories are just a couple pages. Got the heavy tanks that you remember maybe from Nausicaa, but a little different. And again, they all have really, really just adorable artwork and fun stories. This is Chinese pre-dreadnoughts that actually existed, but of course a lot of if you watched Howl's Moving Castle, he deals with that a little bit. It's pretty cool. This one's great about flak towers. And he, of course, Miyazaki takes it to the next level. It's not just, it's way more intense than the previous flak towers. This is great. He has the communications flak tower painted to look like the landscape around it, to camouflage it. I just love that. Flak towers are still standing in Germany, actually. This is a good one. Q-ship. Hiding all the deception that went on in World War One. Like a lifeboat concealing a 5-inch gun or whatever. Ambushing U-boats, that kind of thing. And then U-boats attempting to fight back. And, of course, it's got the Miyazaki touch more and more. torpedo plane. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's such a fun book, so creative. And again, in the 80s, you had to wait a couple months for one of these to appear in the back of Model Graphics magazine. Little Japanese fishing boat that takes on. Here's a little blip on Porco Rosso. I guess one thing he said is that, when he was doing all these stories, Agnostica, and his very famous probably Totoro and such, he would decompress by drawing this historical stuff. Here's that VK4501 experimental tiger. It's funny that only one of these went into combat, but in his story he has two. Two of them together. And it's just his obsession with like the kind of over engineering and just wild ideas being sent out in the real world. This tank was actually kind of like a hybrid. It had diesel engines that charged electric motors. So when it drove, it was an electric. It was a hybrid. But it depended on the engines to charge the batteries, which probably gave it great torque. But of course, they screwed up a lot. Like mechanically, they were a nightmare. Only one saw action. Again, he has his hypothetical story where two are seeing combat. Maybe I should correct myself. He shows that one of them was abandoned. So only one makes it in the battle. But the truth is, the one that was used was the command vehicle for a Ferdinand unit, which was a good idea. Anyway, so these are just brilliant books. If you can get a hold of them, I highly recommend it. If you have a kid that's really into ingenuity and kind of retro futurist stuff, or just beautiful artwork, it's totally worth getting. And also, showing that war is a little more complicated than, the Western idea, I should say the American idea. Everyone's got a story, everyone's got a motivation. There's suffering everywhere. And I just highly recommend these books. I think, let's say your kid's a little bit of a warmonger, they will arrive at pacifism, or at least at, an anti-war stance. The more you learn about history, the more you expose yourself. It's when you resist that you get these people that have very simplistic views. So please keep expanding the minds of your children. Anyway, thanks for watching.